Hey everybody, it's Caleb Crew with Caleb Crew Reports and Predicts, and today we're going to be going over some specific state polls for the Democratic primary in 2020, the presidential primary. Before we continue, if you guys would like to hear more content on elections from here and around the globe, be sure to like and subscribe. So the first poll, we're going to be going over Iowa, New Hampshire, California, and Texas. Uh, some polling there, and so we're going to start with Iowa. And so Iowa is it's February 3rd is the caucus. It's going to be the first contest. It's very important because Iowa, if you win or you do well there, it does create a lot of momentum going forward. And so these are just some of the recent polls. We're going to start out with the FRA Dave Binder poll, and it shows Elizabeth Warren in second at 23, Joe Biden 25, um, Bernie Sanders at 9, Buttigieg at 12, Harris at 5, Klobuchar at 8, and then Booker at 2, Yang at 2, Steyer at 3, and everybody else is at 1 or less. This is very interesting to see Amy Klobuchar doing so high, and same with Pete Buttigieg. And if you're Bernie Sanders or Kamala Harris, you have to feel really bad about that poll. Now, going forward, this is a bit of an outlier. Not every other poll shows this, but all these polls are kind of bad news for Kamala Harris. She's very lagging in these polls, and Amy Klobuchar is actually kind of close to her. So that must be really in Iowa bad for Harris. So then you have the Iowa State University poll shows Warren at 24, Biden at 16, Sanders at 16, Buttigieg at 13, Harris at 5, Klobuchar at 3, Gabbard at 4, Booker at 2, Yang at 3, Steyer at 2, O'Rourke at 2. Everybody else is 1 or less. This poll is really good news for two people mainly, Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg. It shows that Mayor Pete is kind of creeping up towards the top tier in Iowa, but it shows Elizabeth Warren is clearly the favorite in Iowa. And then the Des Moines Register poll that just came out, it showed, and they're really good at predicting the winners. Their Des Moines Register is really good, and so Elizabeth Warren's at 22, Joe Biden at 20, Bernie Sanders at 11, Pete Buttigieg at 9, Kamala Harris at 6, Amy Klobuchar at 3, Tulsi Gabbard at 2, Cory Booker at 3, Drew Yang at 2, Steyer at 2, Booker at 2, O'Rourke at 2. Everybody else is at 1 or less. And so, really, this is just another good poll for Elizabeth Warren. Another bad one for Bernie Sanders, and bad for Joe Biden that he's been losing the lead to Elizabeth Warren. But good for Pete Buttigieg, and he could really be a dark horse in this as well. Now we're going to go over to uh, New Hampshire. So New Hampshire will be your second primary. And just a key note in a lot of these polls, you have to have 15% in order to get delegates. So, this is still pretty early. So, a lot of this can change. So, a Harris X poll, we'll start with Emerson, had Biden at 24, Sanders at 13, Warren at 21, Buttigieg at 11, Harris at 8, Tulsi Gabbard at 6, Yang at 3, Booker at 4, Delaney at 3. Everybody else is 1 or less. Then the Boston Herald had Joe Biden at 21, Bernie Sanders at 29, Elizabeth Warren at 17, Pete Buttigieg at 5, Kamala Harris at 6, Tulsi Gabbard at 3, Andrew Yang at 5, and Beto O'Rourke at 2. Everybody else was at 1 or less. And the no labels Harris X poll had Joe Biden at 22, Bernie Sanders at 21, Elizabeth Warren at 15, Pete Buttigieg at 5, Kamala Harris at 5, Tulsi Gabbard at 6, Andrew Yang at 2, Booker at 3, and Steyer at 2, and everybody else at 1 or less. What we could take out is in New Hampshire, it's going to be a really close race to win. Right now, Biden, Sanders, and Warren are really battling it out. Pete Buttigieg is in fourth, which you've kind of seen him in some of these uh, polls on the two early states. He's kind of separating himself a little bit from Kamala Harris, which is really bad news for her. For Tulsi Gabbard is really good news. Her average is at 5 points, and she was consistently doing very well in this polling, and right on the neck of Kamala Harris, which so it will probably be a very good state for Tulsi Gabbard. Then we go over to the California Democratic primary, and we have two polls from there. The Survey USA poll has Joe Biden at 27, Bernie Sanders at 18, Elizabeth Warren at 16, Kamala Harris at 13, Andrew Yang at 7, Beto O'Rourke at 2, Pete Buttigieg at 3, Cory Booker at 2, Castro at 2, everybody's at 1 or less. Then the Emerson poll has Joe Biden at 26, Bernie Sanders at 26, Elizabeth Warren at 20, Kamala Harris at 6, Andrew Yang's ahead of her at 7, which is just very impressive. Beto O'Rourke at 5, Pete Buttigieg at 4, Tulsi Gabbard at 2, and everybody's at 1 or less. So one, the big takeaways is really good news for Andrew Yang to be polling so high, and in one poll being polling above Kamala Harris. And so this is just Kamala Harris has been having a very bad a couple weeks. I mean, she's not even at 15% to get delegates in her home state. So that's extremely bad news for her. And she's going to have to find a way to turn this around, or Senator Harris is just sinking, and if she doesn't find a way to turn it around, her presidential chances are fading very quickly. Uh, Again, very good news for Andrew Yang. And if he can just continue to tick up, he actually may get some delegates out of California, which would be very good for him. And then we'll go to Texas. Now, some of these polls are really old, so we're just going to do the Texas Lyceum and the Quinnipiac poll because they're somewhat recent. And so the Texas Lyceum poll has Biden at 24, O'Rourke at 18, Elizabeth Warren at 15, Sanders at 13, Harris at 4, Buttigieg at 3, Castro at 3, Yang at 2, Klobuchar at 3, Booker at 2, and everybody else is 1 or less. And then Quinnipiac has Biden at 28, O'Rourke at 12, Warren at 18, Sanders at 12, Harris at 5, Buttigieg at 3, Castro at 3, Klobuchar at 2. Everybody's 1 or less. So this is very good news for Beto O'Rourke because a lot of these older polls and some of these polls I've seen that are not here on Real Clear Politics have Beto O'Rourke doing really well. So he's definitely going to get some delegates out of Texas, and it depends how many other people can. I mean, Bernie Sanders isn't at the 15 mark right now, so he may not get delegates out of this. Elizabeth Warren is barely at 15. You know, lot's going to change, and this is a Super Tuesday state like California, so a lot can change, but it does look like this poll is really good for Beto O'Rourke and really good for Joe Biden. And it shows this one in the California poll show that Joe Biden can just hangs in there till Super Tuesday. He may actually do really well. And he may do a firewall, but if he starts breaking down early, he may not have a firewall to back him up, and the candidate gets a lot of momentum. It's very hard, but it does show a really splintered field. And when you go into the individual states, as you guys have seen, certain candidates are doing better than in national polling, and that's really what we should look at. And that's why, like Pete Buttigieg, his performance in Iowa and New Hampshire show that he can do very well in some of these particular states. Also, the same can be said about Tulsi Gabbard and her performance in New Hampshire. But all over Kamala Harris is just in trouble. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway from the individual state polling and national polling is that Kamala Harris has to do something, or her candidacy is just dead in the water because she had a really high after that first debate and taking out Joe Biden, but ever since Kamala Harris has been sinking. Um, Pete Buttigieg seems to be very solid, um, and he may be able to tick up a little bit. Elizabeth Warren has been steadily ticking up, and in some of the more recent pollings, you've seen that. And Bernie Sanders in Iowa, his performance in Iowa is just really bad. And if you're Bernie Sanders, you have to be very worried about that. But then he turns around in New Hampshire and is able to kind of steady the ship. Joe Biden is really bad in the early states, but the later that gets on, he's doing well. So we'll see if he can keep that up. Andrew Yang is doing well in some of these smaller states as well. So we'll just see what happens. I mean, like I said, it really fractures when you get into individual states opposed to the national polling. And I think that's really what we should be looking at more because that's a lot more predictive of how the race is going to turn out. Because it's not a national primary, you vote in each state at different times. It's several mini elections in one giant election. So thank you guys so much. If you guys would like the video and hit the subscribe button, it would mean so much. And just keep tuning in for more content. Thank you guys so much and have a great day.